In this video, as promised, I want to take a quick moment to talk about an alternative way we can use this.setState. This.setState also allows you to pass an object directly in instead of a function. This is the older approach, so passing an object in has existed as long as React component state has existed. The updater function style is a little newer, but this is becoming preferred, and in future versions of React, there's rumors that this will be the only way to get the job done. So let's say we did want to use this older obsolete syntax. How exactly would we do that? Well, we would just call this.setState, passing in an update object. So like we return an update object here, we would just pass it directly in. I might update the count equal to 0. Perfect. Now, nothing's wrong with this. Let's go ahead and save the counter example. We can change the count to some sort of non-zero number. We click reset and the count does indeed get reset. So everything works really, really well. The problem is when you're trying to update the state based off of the current state values. So let's go ahead and try to do that without using the updater function. Down below, we're going to add another this.setState call. As our components get more complex, we're going to have setState calls firing all over the place. Probably not in the same function back to back, but we are going to have them firing at the same time in different functions. So right here, what's the goal? The goal is to just increment the count by 1. So we're going to set count equal to the current count, this.state.count, the object we know exists because we used it right here. And then we are going to add 1 plus 1. Now, what would we expect to happen when we click reset? We would expect that no matter what the current count is, it gets set to 0, then it gets incremented by 1. So no matter where we are, the end result should be 1 printing to the screen. Let's go ahead and see what happens. I'm going to save the counter example. I'm going to change the count to some non-zero, non-1 number. I'm going to click reset. And you can see that we're actually getting 9, not 1. And if I click reset again, the count just goes up 1 time for every time I click the button. So what exactly is happening here? The first thing we need to understand is that our calls to this.setState are asynchronous. That means just because we started this process of changing the count doesn't mean the count will be changed on the very next line. That is why when we try to access this.state here, we're still getting the old value. We've started the process of getting the count to 0, but it hasn't completed yet. So when we grab the value, we're getting the old one, which was 15, we're adding 1 to it, and that's why we see 16 printing to the screen. So why is this.setState asynchronous? It's asynchronous because there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than updating an object. Yes, React does merge the old state object with the new one, but then it goes ahead and it does all that stuff we talked about where it creates a virtual DOM representation of your component and it figures out what stuff needs to change. Then and only then is this.state brought up to speed. So because React is really efficient and it batches together our setState operations, allowing it to re-render less often, we can get into really weird situations like this one, where we're accessing stale and outdated data. In this case, we are not getting the result we expect. So what's the solution? The solution is to always use this.setState with an updater function. It does not suffer from the same problems because we never access this.state. Instead, React passes in prev state, and we're going to see how that's going to affect this particular example. So let's comment out these two this.setState calls with objects, and we're going to recreate it using the function syntax. So we already have the first one in place. I'm going to copy this and paste it down below, and we're just going to try to increment it by 1. Right here, do we want to access the previous state? Yes. So we're going to name this argument. Then we're going to go ahead and actually access it. So previous state.count. What are we going to do? We're just going to go ahead and add 1 onto it. I'm going to save the file. The browser is going to refresh in the background, and we can go ahead and get ourselves to a non-zero, non-1 number. I'm going to use 15 again. In the past, when we used the objects with this.setState, we got 16. When I use the functions, what do we get? We get 1, which is the correct result. The result that we initially thought we would get down below, but didn't get. So let's go ahead and talk about what's happening here and how that's different from what happened down below. The first call to this.setState comes in. React is going to go ahead. It's going to call our function. It is going to pass in the previous state, which we don't use here, and it's going to get the object back. Those are the state changes. So it sees we want to change the count to 0. So it knows that, and then it's going to go off and it's going to do its asynchronous thing. It is going to try to compute the virtual DOM and figure out what it needs to change to get the component updated. Now, before it actually finishes all of that, before the component gets re-rendered, another this.setState call comes in. React sees this and it says, hey, do I want to render twice or do I just want to render once? So what it's actually going to do is it's going to try to batch these together. It's going to figure out what needs to change here. It is going to make sure the DOM reflects that. Then and only then will it update. So this is going to prevent it from updating a bunch of times, which can get really inefficient. So what happens? React knows right away when this call comes in that its state it just computed, where the count was 0, it's out of date. So it goes ahead and it tries to figure out what changes were made. And it actually passes that state in. It passes in the state where the count is 0, not the original state where the count was 15. That means when we add 1 right here, we are taking 0 and bringing it up to 1, as opposed to taking the outdated value 15 and bringing it up to 16. Now, at this point in React's life, there's nothing inherently wrong with passing an object to this.setState as long as you don't need access to the previous state values. So here we do need access to the previous state values. We should not be using an object. Here we don't need access to the previous state values. So we could get by with an object, but there are some rumors that this will be the only way going forward, passing a function into this.setState. And quite frankly, it is the preferred syntax. It's going to allow us to build out our applications without running into pitfalls like this. So even though passing an object to this.setState is not deprecated yet, it's definitely not the future of React. So we're not going to use that throughout the course. We're never going to see it again. Instead, we're going to be passing in a function to this.setState every single time. Now that we know a bit more about this.setState and why we want to pass a function to it as opposed to an object, I am going to remove this second call. That was only there for example purposes. When someone does click the reset button, we do indeed want to set the count to 0. I'm going to increment the count to 5, click reset, it goes back down to 0. Everything is working as expected. We have successfully implemented component state. The next video is going to require you to put everything you just used into practice. You're going to be converting the visibility toggle over to components and component state. Let's go ahead and jump over there and dive into that.